All right, so the foot and ankle complex is what we're looking at today, right? So this is going to be where we really do take a look at our foundation. Ankle obviously very, very important because it is kind of setting us up for how we are designed to move in every other capacity. And there are a lot of injuries associated with the foot and ankle complex. In fact, ankle sprains, and this is a statistic that you'll hear me say all the time because it actually is a test question that I've seen before. It is one of the very few test questions that I remember back when I took my test, like, what feels like centuries ago at this point. But that is going to be that ankle sprains are the most common sports-related injury, non-contact at least. But when it comes to injuries, the most common thing to have is not hamstring tendinopathy, it's not a torn ACL, it's ankle sprains. So, and a lot of that happens because we don't really move our ankle the way we're supposed to, or maybe we do move it the way we're supposed to. We just don't have like proper mobility, right? Both of those things can kind of lead to a sprain. So, so introducing your foot and ankle complex here before we even get into the notes. You can see we've got 26 bones in here, which is pretty darn, that's a lot of little individual bones, right? You get all of these like little ones here, and then you got like these little, this is your phalanges, those are like your actual toes. You get the bridge of your foot here, and then you get all these like little cuboid bones making up the ankle itself. Fun fact, when I was a kid, I think I was 5, maybe I was, yeah, I think I was 5. I had a Batman costume, and I went over to this girl Jamie's house. We climbed up a tree in her backyard, and I jumped out of that tree, and I broke my foot in 22 places.
Oh,
Liquidized my foot.
oh my God.
It was brutal. And if I had a Superman costume, I would have been fine. Batman can't fly. I was a kid. I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. But like it was so funny because I remember like my mom tells the story all the time. And the doctor was like, he's 5. They'll grow back. Like he was like really casual about it. He was like, keep mopping for a while. It'll be fine. We set them all. And I've never really had any ankle problems, to be honest. But that's, I know. That's all the little pieces here. I wish I
Jeez.
had that X-ray. I really wish I
Oh
had.
my God. Damn. That would be
Bring it in
fucking
and show
crazy
me
to
in
see.
class. Yeah.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
ankle sprains I used to have those a lot. I used to skateboard, so you already know how that goes. Oh,
Yeah.
there's oh man. Ugh, just hate thinking about it, right?
Yep. Breaking the bones are worse.
Mhm.
So 26 bones, and then 19 large muscles. So some big ones there, but then I like how it just says many intrinsic muscles. So there's also a lot of little itty bitty tiny muscles like living between these little bones here, not only acting as like muscles so they can actually move the muscles of the foot around, but also like, it's kind of funny. This is where the lines between like connective tissue and muscle kind of start to blur a little bit. Because they're giving your foot support. Normally, muscle's job is to just kind of manipulate the skeleton. It's not really to create too much like just static support, but there is some isometric stabilization within these little intrinsic muscles, right? And then more than 100 ligaments, right? Like tons of connective tissue. With that many bones, your bones are going to have like one or more joints at least, right? So we can see like this one here's got, 1, 2, 3, 4 places where it's connecting other bones. And so that's going to take 4 like ligaments, unless it's got 2 because it's maybe attaching up top and down below, like a little bit differently. So we're going to see a lot of connective tissue in the foot, which is why we see a very rigid foot be sort of a problem. People, they get their foot to ankle kind of tightens up, and then that lack of like, that over tightness leads to like lack of mobility, and that lack of mobility often leads to injury. So it is in charge. We do know that foot trouble is very, very common, but your foot is responsible for like all of like the support for the rest of your body and then like propelling you around. And so, I would argue that the most important postural part of your body, it isn't like keeping your chest up, although that is very important, and we should definitely do that. It's making sure that your foot moves the way it's supposed to. If you guys subscribe to any like Instagram, or YouTubers or like fitness people, it's so funny. Like they all just constantly talk about the foot. The ones that are like really serious about like good form, not so much like the weight loss community or crowd, or like the modeling crowd. But like when you get into like the physical therapists become personal trainers style, it's like every one of them is just constantly talking about like foot stuff. My favorite is Squat University.
Oh yeah. Oh, did you see that video about that guy lifting 2,000 pounds deadlift recently? Like that's
2000.
like yeah, that's like the world record supposedly. If you check it out, that's like the latest post. Yeah, right there, that guy in the red. Yeah. Yeah, I can't believe that shit. I'm like, no, there's no way. Look at this guy. 2,216.
Oh, that's his total. Okay, I was
Oh,
like,
that's his total? Oh, okay,
there's
my
no way.
bad.
Okay, I was like, yeah, there's no way. That's his powerlifting total. Squat plus
Oh,
bench
I
plus
see. Oh, yeah,
deadlift.
yeah, you're right, you're right. What was his deadlift? That's like 800. Oh, it's not bad.
Yeah, because I
But
was
that's
like,
a total
the
score. I
deadlift
see what
world
you mean.
record was
Yeah, I
like
was about to say
1,000.
like 1,005, 1,010, something like that,
Yeah,
right? Oh, there's just no way. My
yeah, but
bad, I
that
read that
is
wrong.
still. I mean, that's so impressive. That's amazing. Bilbo Swaggins is that guy's name. Oh my God, that's great. Uh, but you'll notice that he will do a lot of like foot stuff, and he always warms up barefoot. Like, we spend a lot of time because it's your foundation for everything. And then like, we talk about shoes a lot. You can see here, like, you see the normal narrow shoe and it causes this kind of bunching up action versus like having a nice wide toe box. This is why we like barefoot squatting sometimes. It allows your foot to spread out the way it's supposed to. We don't want to have a super narrow shoe. So anyway, yeah, big fan of that channel in particular. I think Aaron Horschig is a really terrific physical therapist who really does know a lot. So, but yeah, there's really, this is why we spend so much time talking about the foot and ankle. We know that like when our foot becomes a little bit too rigid, or when it doesn't like pronate, or when it doesn't like supinate adequately the way it's supposed to, we start to see problems, right? Or if the foot remains in pronation, which is obviously very common, we also start to see problems. Because what's interesting about your foot is that it's not really supposed to be in the same position the whole time. Like you think about like, if you were to track like how your arm is moving through like a bicep curl, for the most part, it kind of stays in like one position, or even your shoulders, like it's all kind of one angle, and very consistent there. Oh, dust run up my nose. But your ankle is meant to kind of roll through like where it's putting the pressure on itself through different like stances, right? Like it starts on your heel and then you roll to the foot. Then you should be rolling to the outside of your foot near your pinky toe before you sort of flatten out after that and then press forward. So like you shouldn't be just rolling like flat through like heel straight to center of the foot. It kind of should roll a little bit like that and then dig. Which actually makes a lot of sense if you think about the fact that like, you are trying to like lessen the impact as much as possible. So you use the little tiny toes first, and then like the bigger ones, until eventually you've kind of, slowed your momentum down, right? It's just like, I mean, you wouldn't, if you were falling onto the ground, like face first, you would like, you kind of have your fingertips out first, right? And then eventually your palm, and then you would sort of slow everything down, right? But we don't see that. We don't see too many people move that way.
The same thing with the jump squats, right? Like you jump and then you land with your tippy toes and then you come back down like that.
Exactly, yeah. And what's
Yeah.
interesting is if you zoom in even further, we actually kind of land on our I'm like doing this, not like that. You land a little bit like this and then to the center and then down.
Yeah.
And that's why you'll sometimes see like barefoot runners. Let's see if I can find a picture of this actually.
I tried landing on my heels at one point when I was learning those. Oh my God, it hurt so bad.
Yeah.
Never again.
Right. Wait, hold on a second. I actually have to add that to my watch later. The Escape Room Tournament of Champions. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
That one's for me. All right. So here we go. Let's take a look at like what barefoot technique looks like here. There we go. So that's pretty good. Like this is him in shoes, right? But you'll notice like as he's kind of propelling himself, right? The different parts of his ankle. And you'll notice he actually supinates just a little bit right there. See how he's got a little bit of like inversion happening? And then he hits the ground, rolls to the center, and propels himself all the way through. Now, this is obviously very different than what we sort of think of when we think of running. A lot of people think running is just faster walking, but they are two totally different movements. It's like the difference between a squat and a lunge. Yeah, they're both hip extension. Yeah, they're both using the glutes, the quads, the hamstrings. Like they're both involved with both of that, but they are different movements. The walk, you are sort of pulling yourself from step to step, right? Like I step and I pull myself forward, right? Running is not like that. Look at this. He is springing from one step to the next. He's going to hit the ground. He's going to absorb and transfer his weight. And then he is going to jump. Oh my God, of course it did. He is going to land and hit the ground. And he's going to transfer his weight until he gets at sort of a forward angle here. And then he is going to jump. He is doing hip extension. He is springing to the next one. Just like in the really exaggerated version where you see people like start on the ground and do that bit, you know, when they're on the starting blocks, right? It's sort of an exaggerated version of that. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in real barefoot here. Again, you can kind of see he hits the outside ridge of his foot first before transferring, right? So just a little bit of inversion. See, you can see the bottom of the foot a little bit easier. And he hits the ground, transfers, and then springs forward. So that is I was about to like put my settings back at fast speed. I've never taken the time to actually assume that there's slow motion. I'm gonna use that video every time from now on. So there is a difference, right? Look at the difference between walking and running, right? One foot is always in contact with the ground with walking. In fact, I've pulled this video up before. This is just for fun. But I've pulled this up before. Thomas, I think you might remember this. Olympic speed walking, which is the silliest looking thing in the world.
Oh shit, I've seen that.
It looks like just like it's a bunch of people all trying to get to the bathroom first, but trying to be polite.
Wasn't this chick on the Olympics, right? Or no?
This girl? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, no. I don't know. I started seeing this like meme recently of that person.
Oh, just like of speed walking?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is very interesting looking.
Yeah, there you go. What the
Yeah. And it looks kind of silly. And they do this like major hip swing. Like look at their hips. That's actually what's kind of fascinating about this, like this side to side like hip thing, right? And it looks goofy. But the reason they do that is because like in order to be considered a walk, one foot always has to be in contact with the ground at all times. Running, you get a little air, you know? But with walking, you have to have contact. So what they do is they kick their hip out and that shortens the distance. They have to swing their leg forward so they can take their next step really fast. Personally, I can't imagine how bad this is for your body with all that QL movement. Not a fan of that. Personally, just from a pure biomechanics standpoint. But here's the thing, like these people are traveling really fast, right? I mean, they are like, this dude's doing a 7-minute mile for 20 miles. Like,
jeez.
Like that's his average, right? Like that's the world
Wait,
record. Like,
so they're all running like that to hit that?
I mean, they're walking, but yes.
What? Yeah, oh my god, yeah, that jeez.
I
Dude, by
mean,
the end of it, I'll probably have like my hips like fall off.
yeah, I know a lot of people who cannot do a 7-minute mile run for 1 mile. Like,
Yeah.
these guys are walking. So, you know, it is an impressive sport. But walking and running couldn't be more different from one another. Running is very much a front of the foot situation. Walking is very much a heel situation. So very, very different. Now, like I said, we're going to start every one of these days, by the way. We're going to start all of our body parts by talking about how it goes wrong first. So ankle sprains, right? Very, very common. What that is, any sprain, what it is going to be the stretching or tearing of one or more ligaments, right? So, ankle sprains, super, super common. Like I said, most common sports related injury. That's not so great. But here's the thing. If your ankle heals up afterwards, what's the big deal? What could possibly be that bad? Well, what's really bad about ankle sprains, if you and this starts to make more sense when you just take a second to think a little bit deeper about it, but it has been shown to decrease the neural drive, which means just like the nervous system connection to the muscular system of the gluteus medius and gluteus maximus. So why is that such a big deal? Well, remember, those are muscles that travel up and they really have a big impact on how your spine happens and low back. And so we see a very direct connection between ankle sprains and back injuries. And like I told you guys, I actually had sorry, there's a kind of a dramatic thing that happened this morning, so my phone's blown up. So I actually had to read, like the paper that I had to read in college was like all about how ankle sprains lead to shoulder impingement on the opposite side. Like a right ankle sprain leads to like left shoulder impingement. And basically the gist of that, not to be super reductive, is like, when you are spraining your ankle, you walk around like this, right? You end up doing this kind of thing where, you just don't put as much weight. You're not performing hip extension anymore to like drive yourself back. So then the glute, which is the prime mover for hip extension, the gluteus medius, which also now you're also like kind of kicking your knee in, right? Gluteus medius drives your knee out. Both of those muscles don't work as much as they are supposed to. So then what ends up happening is this glute muscle has to take on the brunt of all that effort. So then we start to see some asymmetry where now my pelvis, which can do this, I'm not dancing on camera, but it does do this like movement here side to side, right? Now it starts to tighten up on this side, starts to loosen up on this side, right? And now I've got this like scoliosising action. I know we think of scoliosis as something you're born with, but it is absolutely something you can develop. And then it kind of travels up and we start to see like, if I tilt this way, then I have to tilt back this way with my other side. And so now this is being pinched. And so ankle sprain, shoulder impingement. And it's crazy how that stuff travels up the kinetic chain. I used to talk, we'll talk about this on lumbopelvic hip day, but like, wallets, guys, don't keep I know that it's like back pocket. That's like the thing, don't do it because you're going to sit on that thing.
Yeah, I don't like that. It just feels uncomfortable for me.
Yeah,
I don't
unlevel your pelvis.
yeah.
I'm from like I get crap from my rural family, like I'm from the, like I'm from Oregon, not like, but like it's very rural Oregon. I come from a long line of truck drivers, loggers, and fishermen, like, and so all of them, you look at their genes, they were the same genes for 20 years. And it's like you can see a square in their on their butt where like their wallet is 24 hours a day.
Jeez.
And I'm just like, that is so bad for your posture. And they all give me crap for, being the weirdo who keeps it in his front pocket.
Right.
And also not for not having a beard down to here. A lot of lumberjacks in Oregon. Ankle sprains, right? So how does this happen? How do we get this sort of ankle sprain? Well, it comes from and like I said, so any sprain, by the way, is going to be the excessive stretching or tearing of one or more of the ligaments in the ankle there, right? So the biggest one, like I said, is the lateral side, the lateral ankle sprain, most common injury here. And what's happening is there is excessive inversion and that causes a tear. Now, here's where this sometimes gets a little confusing. Remember how whenever we're describing kinesiology or whenever we're describing like muscles, we always talk about like what's happening and then we do the opposite, right? And so sometimes like you know, when you're hearing these definitions for the first time, it's like, oh, okay, so this is somebody who does excessive inversion. No, they excessively inverted one time and it caused a major injury because they excessively evert most of the other time. So their body was so used to eversion, it got used to being in that position, that the one day they tried to invert, the ligament, which was like, no, I'm used to being in this, it was supposed to like stretch out to its full length. And instead it was just like, no, I'm just going to hold on. And then it just tore rather than stretching the way it was supposed to. So the most common results from excessive inversion that causes damage to the structures. Not that this person had excessive inversion in their posture, they had excessive eversion consistently in their posture. And the one day they tried to invert, they sprained it, right? So they probably took a misstep and they stepped like this, right? They probably did this kind of thing where they just rolled their ankle, right? And normally they should be able to do this kind of movement, right? You should be able to sit like this. But unfortunately, because they spend all their time this way instead, I'm majorly exaggerating here. You know, it would actually look something almost normal. But because they spend all day like this, when they went to roll it, the whole thing just tore instead. Right? Imagine if you walked around for a week like this, and then one day someone's like, you know, hey, unfold your arm. And you're like, oh, okay. But then, you know, you'd probably want to go really slow and controlled. But if somebody took your arm and just went like that, your bicep would probably tear. You'd probably get a pulled muscle. And that's what happens all the time. That's why people pull their hamstrings, because they spend all day sitting and it's in a bent position, which is flexed. Then all of a sudden they try to straighten it and it tears. Other ones we're going to see are high ankle sprains. These are also very, actually, I got to give you the little factoids about this before you move. Yeah. Sorry. So other parts about ankle sprains. So like I said, most common sports related injury. It has been shown to decrease the neural drive of that gluteus and medius, which is going to cause all kinds of other problems. Most ankle sprains are the lateral ankle sprain. And that's of your calcaneofibular ligament. We call that your CFL. That looks like this. This little ligament right along the side. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go with a simplified version. That's a little easier to see. But there we go, right? It's this one right here. So that's your CFL. There's also your ATL. That's also lateral. These two often are the ones that really become a problem. And it's where your fibula is being attached to the rest of your foot. Because your lower leg is two bones, right? This one needs to be able to rotate compared to the big one. That's really like this is the real connection to the rest of your leg here. But this one is what allows you to have rotational movements. Just like you've got the two bones here that allows you to pronate and supinate. Well, by having a fibula, you are able to pronate and supinate. So this is your calcaneus, which is the scientific name for your heel bone. This is your fibula, which is the lateral of the two bones. And so that's your calcaneofibular ligament. And again, it's a term that you guys are probably not going to be tested on. But I want you guys to have a pretty good view of like how all this stuff happens. And by the way, look at all that connective tissue.
That's a lot, yeah.
It's a lot, right? So there's your calcaneofibular, there's your ATL. That's your anterior talofibular. Again, calcaneofibular, calcaneus to fibula. This bone right here is called your talus or your talus. And that's the first of the ankle bones. And that's where your tibia actually sits. We'll talk about the talus here in just a moment, but yeah, that one's there as well. Very, 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 very commonly injured. So the way it happens is excessive inversion, right? You know, you think about like, you know, the fact that this is on the side there, right? That's why, there we go. Oh, I love this picture. That's actually awesome. There it is. There's the excessive inversion. And that caused the tear, right? This is somebody who rolled their ankle. Or, you know, this version here as well. It can also cause a ATL tear. So yeah, so that is sort of where we're at. I know it's like a really violent picture.
I'm traumatized.
I know. Yeah, the next day, by the way, is the next week or so, not for the squeamish. We're gonna be seeing some injuries here. And inevitably, I'm sure I'll end up Googling something and they'll be like, oh, you want to see what the ligament looks like? And it'll be like the real ligament. And it'll be like, I'm like, yeah, hopefully we don't see too many of those. But I don't have any control over Google image.
Yeah.
We also got the high ankle sprain. That's that anterior tibiofibular ligament. So anterior tibiofibular ligament. This is what's known as the high ankle sprain. And this one is the one that is up top, right? So this is your ATFL, different than just your, and that's the anterior, it's on the front, talo, this bone right here, that's your talus, it's living underneath everything, fibular ligament, right? Or tibiofibular ligament, where it'll actually attach to the tibia as well. And that's the one that you'll see on this side, right? So there are connections to your tibia and your fibula. Obviously, we need both bones to be connected to our freaking ankle. But if you sprain any of those, we call that the high ankle sprain. That usually happens, high ankle sprains usually happen when someone's wearing like a super rigid shoe or a rigid boot. It's really common amongst like military members because they'll wear those like super rigid boots and then they'll twist and then it's like the two bones, your tibia and your fibula are coming down and then it tries to twist and it can't because it's all just kind of held together and pinched together. So something can move and then the other things like stay put. Like that's exactly how we break it. So really common, or sometimes you'll see like during every now and then, it's pretty rare, but it'll still happen in like the NFL. We use like a foot tackle. That'll like sometimes cause that. That one's not, that one usually like it's a little bit worse, but it also doesn't have like long-term repercussions. It's not as nagging, but they do usually have to go in and just like surgically like repair those. My nephew had to do that actually. So that is what we are seeing in those injuries. We are also going to see a very common injury, which is plantar fasciitis. So this is a little bit more of a muscular thing or tendon style thing rather than ligaments, right? So here is your soleus muscle coming down here, and then it becomes a tendon and grabs your heel bone, then it wraps around. This actually makes it look like it stops here and then this is something else. It wraps around, it's all one connected fascia, but it wraps around the heel there. And then all of this fascia right here from the bridge of the foot, right, that webbing on the arch of your foot, that can rub on these bones here. And so we call that plantar fasciitis. You'll often hear your clients describe it as like a stabbing, burning sensation that they feel at their heel. And it's usually worse in the morning when people first wake up, which seems kind of weird. But they tighten up slowly overnight. The muscle gets used to being in its shortened, tightened up position. And then when they start walking in the morning, they're stretching it. And so it's really bad at first. Then it gets nice and warm. Some blood gets in there and it's a little less painful after that. And then it's like, once it's warmed up, it's fine. But usually you'll hear people who have plantar fasciitis, it'll be bad in the morning, or if they've been sitting for a couple hours and they get up to do something, that's when the pain really kind of comes up. And that again is caused by like, a weak foot, right? That isn't supporting itself properly. So that's causing altered biomechanics and rubbing sensations, or, just tightness, right? Like we just got to make sure that we are moving the way we're supposed to. Another one we're going to see is what's called Achilles tendinopathy. We call this tendon right here, gets a special name. We call it the Achilles tendon because that's where, that's Achilles didn't wrap. He was dipped in the nectar of the gods or whatever, but his mom had to hold him by his heel. And so that was the one part of him that was mortal. And that's where, Achilles got his butt kicked one day. I think the true life story of that's like the legend version, but I do think he took an arrow through the heel and that's what took him out eventually. And he was like a legendary real life warrior.
Right.
But the Greeks turned all their real life warriors into gods eventually in their stories. But that's why they call it the Achilles tendon. And it's right there. This is the thing that you hit on. This is the thing that hits you when you're like at the grocery store and like you get smacked in the back of the heel with the cart and you're like, ah. Oh man. That's the worst. I remember I don't know why that used to happen to me all the time, but but yeah, so that's your Achilles tendon. And you'll hear this. This and plantar fasciitis. Honestly, guys, they're basically exactly the same thing. They're just in different places. It's all this fascia around here, and it gets really tight and it rubs in a way that it's not supposed to, or overstretches or overpulls, and then it gets inflamed. And so the same thing of the bridge of the foot. That's the plantar fasciitis because that's your plantar fascia, and then this is your Achilles tendonitis. You know, are they the same thing? Yeah, essentially. You know, they're just in different locations. Anytime, and by the way, that actually leads me to this. Whenever you hear the word itis, guys, that means inflammation.
Inflammation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So tendonitis, you know, sometimes you'll hear the word tendinopathy. And the reason they use that term instead, like this is often, they could call it, some people call it Achilles tendonitis, some people call it Achilles tendinopathy. The only reason we say opathy is like it's pathological, which means it's chronic. So if you've been dealing with plantar fasciitis for a little while, we'll call it fasciitis. And if you've been dealing with Achilles tendonitis for months, we'll call it a tendinopathy. So I always think of like tendonitis as the short term and tendinopathy as the long term, but they are the same thing. They're totally the same thing. And then we got a kind of a fun one here that everybody hates. Medial, I mean, we should hate all of these, but medial tibial stress syndrome, more commonly referred to as shin splints. So, yep. Yeah.
When I used to skate, I used to hit my shins all the damn time with a skateboard. It was like the worst pain in my life.
It's the worst, right?
Actually, it's probably the second worst. First is the ankle, and then there's the freaking shins.
Yep. So, this is where basically you get inflammation in like the anterior compartment here, right? And so when you look at, you know, you got these muscles here on the front and these muscles here. That's your soleus, which I know normally we look at the soleus from the back. It is on the back of the leg, but you can see it from the, you know, if you were to peel everything away, you'd be able to kind of see past and see it right here. And so like there's some fascia that's helping connect all of this muscle to all of this bone, you know, throughout the distance. And so if you know, kind of overstretch and mess with that fascia, it gets inflamed just like anything else does. And so, you know, it feels like it feels like you just fractured the front of your shin. Like you just, it feels like somebody took like, it's just like, you know, it feels like little tiny breaks on your freaking shin there. But, you know, that's kind of, it's not even a bad way to think about it. But, you know, if we look at like the tibiofibular fascia, if you look at like, you know, where these two bones are coming together, right? You know, you can see all this connective tissue here. There's also a webbing that runs between those two bones there all the way down the leg, right? And so you can see this webbing here that's meant to kind of keep these two bones from overstretching too far away from one another. Well, if you end up like, you know, just through lots of impact, vibrating this freaking thing too much, what's going to happen? You're going to overstretch that fascia and you're going to get, you know, aches and pains. So that's shin splints. So those are our most common injuries. And that is what we are sort of trying to avoid through our understanding of anatomy and how the body is supposed to move. Do you guys have any questions or comments on any of these injuries?
Nah. So far makes sense.
Cool. Love it. Yeah, shin splints is a real pain in the butt. That's skaters always get shin splints. Like every skater I've known has had shin splints.
I still have a few like leftover like dead blood bruises on my shins that, you know, from the past. It's just like So bad.
Yeah.
I remember one time I was so we were in the laundry room. I was like, I don't know, maybe 7, 6
Mm.
years old. I was just like, okay, so there was like I think there's like the washing machines was this way, and then
Uh-huh.
there's like another side that was like kind of horizontal. It was like all the dryers.
Yep.
So I was jumping literally from where the washers were. I was running in the washers,
Oh no.
jumping over to the freaking dryers, coming
Yeah.
back again, back and forth, impressing my mom. I'm like, Mom, look, I could jump over this. Look, I'm a badass. And then I try to jump into the dryer from the washing machine. Somehow, I don't know how the hell I just couldn't make it. And both of my shins ended up hitting like at the very corner of the dryers. And so pretend there's a dryer right here, right? Boom. And then I fell backwards. There's
Yeah.
a freaking, I remember that. Like, I still have those bruises since then.
Yeah. You just get that like you get that little
Fuck.
kid scream like "Ah!"
Dude, it was the worst pain at that time. I was like,
Yep.
oh my God, I was yelling so hard.
Oh, terrible. All
Oh man, when we were kids, we just don't know any better, man. So I feel you.
right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I broke everything when I was a kid. I've broken 14 bones in my life.
oh my God.
So bad. Um, and that's, like I said, I'm counting the ankle as a bone.
Yeah. Oh, I
um,
think I broke my ankle too at one point. My left one. Yeah, I remember
okay.
that. I was jumping on my sister's bed, and then you know how like the frame or whatever, like the what is that called? Like we yeah, the wooden
Oh, the footboard.
uh yeah, the footboard. So I ended up like just come I was like I was gonna jump off, but I was trying to gap it, right? I just kind of jumped to the ground and I couldn't, so I rolled my ankle so bad. I think I broke it because I ended up getting a cast and all that shit.
Yeah.
And I remember going to school with crutches, and
Yeah.
it was funny because like kids would tell me, oh, like does it hurt? So I'm like stomping on my freaking bad injury, with the cast. I'm like, no, it doesn't hurt.
Oh my God.
But I remember that. It was crazy. It was my first cast ever in my life. Broke
Yep.
something. I was like, damn,
All
the
right, Thomas,
worst.
what about you? Any broken bones? We're telling chicks dig scar stories.
Either he is AFK or maybe he's just muted.
Maybe. All right, so let's label out some of these bones here, right?
All right.
So being aware of it, we got number H here. So this is your tibia. That's your shin bone sort of proper, right? I think it's your fibula. That's along the side. And again, those are the two bones that make up your lower leg. And that's what allows you to have the rotational movement, right? That's what allows this rotation. Then this big bone right here, the F that you can see here, this is your talus. Okay. That bone, the talus, is sort of navigating your entire like tibia because that's what it's resting on, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then you can actually see if you look at little G here, there's a sort of a hook. That's actually your heel bone. This over here is also part of G.
Oh.
Yeah, it comes all the way behind, kicks out really far, and then it comes up. And so that's what your fibula rests on that little hook there. And that's why, the hook is so big at the bottom of your ankle. If you've ever smacked that thing,
Ooh.
and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Especially
those,
like what do you call it? Like the things from the bottom of the bed when you
uh,
walk by it.
yeah,
You walk by it
I
and
don't
it's just
know.
like,
That's also part of the footboard, I guess.
oh
But yeah,
man.
yeah, those like pieces, yeah, that's the worst, right? Um, but yeah, so those are the two areas where your lower leg is able to rest on your ankle. Then we got number C right here. That's what's called your navicular. It's working with the talus and sort of navigate, and it rests on the calcaneus here. Again, that's kind of supporting everything from down below. And then you got this row here. These are all labeled D. They are separate bones though, but those are what are called your cuneiforms. They're little cuboid shaped bones that are, able to kind of slide. They're plane joints, right? So they're sliding in any direction they need to across each other. E on the outside, that is the one that we call your actual cuboid because it really is quite square. But all of that group, if we group all of this together, we're going to group that and call it your tarsals. Okay. You have the same arrangement if you look at your wrist, the same arrangement in your wrist, right? And then we call these, your carpals. Okay. So those are your carpals in your wrist. They're your tarsals in your ankle. Okay. And that's, again, kind of going back to that one bone, two bone structure that I mentioned that all mammals have, right? One bone up top, two bones down below, lots of bones, and then digits. So these are the tarsals. This group here, all of the bridge of your foot, we call those your metatarsals, just like the bridge of your palm are your metacarpals. So metatarsals here. So carpals, good Lord, I gotta stop talking about the rest. Tarsals, metatarsals, and then this group of 8, we call, these are all your individual toes. Those are what we call your phalanges. Just like in a fish. In fact, if I look up, let's see here, if I look up phalanges, it does end up giving us mostly human stuff. But it's also like, let's see, phalanges. It's their webbing. It's the webbing of like their fins, right? You can see all the phalanges there. So that's that's sort of where everything started. But yeah, so one bone up top, two bones, lots of bones, and digits. Okay. So from the side, same thing you see. There's the calcaneus there. Like I said, it's supporting everything from down below, right? And then you get your cuboid, all your cuneiforms there, metatarsals, and phalanges. And there are joints, there's joints between every one of these where all these bones are meeting. And so that's why you'll hear people describe, it's like, I got top of the foot pain. And they're like, did I break a bone on the top of my foot, or do I have a stress fracture? And it's like, probably not. You certainly can, but chances are you just got like some inflammation, but you got like a pinched joint and it feels very painful, but like a stress fracture, it's much, 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 much more painful. But that's all the very common stuff there. So those are your bones. Questions?
Good.
Love it. Okay, now before we actually get into the muscles for today, like I said, there's only gonna be, what did I say, five or six? So before we even get into that today, really quickly, a guide to understanding how NASM is labeling all this stuff. Now, in traditional kinesiology classes, we will be describing what is called the muscle's action. You've probably heard that term when you, like, if you've watched, like, videos on posture and stuff, they'll say like, this muscle's action is this. That's what everybody says. NASM, for some reason, they like to label it their own way. They call it the isolated function. The isolated function is the action of the muscle. And I actually do like that term. It actually does make a lot of sense, because it's like, it's what the muscle does in isolation, right? Like, it's its main job. And muscle's main job, remember what I said a couple times now, muscles can only pull and then relax. So when the muscle is shortening, when it's pulling, we call that concentric. That's the muscle's action. We label all of this based on what the muscle does when it's pulling. That's the action, or that's the isolated function. The other reason NASM sort of labels it that way is because, like, all right, well, what do we call it when the muscle's contracting, but it's contracting while it's lengthening? We call that the eccentric contraction, right? What about what the muscle does during that? We're going to call that its integrated function. So the isolated function is how the muscle contracts under tension and generates force. The integrated function is how the muscle relaxes and works as part of a group to either lengthen or to stabilize, right? Like, if my biceps and my triceps both contract for an equal amount of force, what's going to happen? I'm not going to move, I'm going to stabilize. So the isolated function is the concentric shortening of the muscle. And the integrated function is either the eccentric lengthening or the isometric stabilizing. And that is why on every muscle you see in your book, it will say these two things. So this is how we label our muscles. This is just me putting notes up here, by the way. This is not in your textbook written like this. This is just, I think, my best explanation of this. So okay. The isolated function is much more commonly referred to as the action of the muscle. It's whatever the muscle does concentrically. It's whatever the muscle does when it's shortening. So the way we're going to use this is, you can see the language here, right? What is the, I'm going to use an easier muscle that's a little easier to understand. So here's our calf muscle, right? We're real familiar with this. This muscle concentrically, and it will always say that first on the isolated function, with one exception in the entire body. It will always say concentrically because it's shortening. That's the isolated action. And then because shortening is like producing movement, it's going to say concentrically accelerates because that's accelerating. Think about like if I were throwing, like let's say I had like a bowling ball in my arms. If I were throwing it, right, I'm accelerating because my deltoid muscles, my pecs, my triceps, all those things are shortening to produce movement. So I'm accelerating that object. So it concentrically accelerates, and then we just say what the joint action is. In this case, it is plantar flexion, which is pointing the toe away. So the way we label this is it concentrically accelerates plantar flexion. Now, the integrated function is always going to be the exact opposite of that. So all we have to do is flip the language. So what's the opposite of concentric? Eccentric. So this will say eccentrically, and what's the opposite of accelerating? Decelerating. So he's slowing something down. So eccentrically decelerates, and then that's during, it's not plantar flexion anymore, it's dorsiflexion, which is the opposite. So flip all your terms around, and then because this is attached to the ankle, it's always going to isometrically stabilize the area. So every muscle's isolated function is to concentrically accelerate something, and its integrated function is to eccentrically decelerate the exact opposite. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
It'll make more sense the more we practice it. But hopefully, yeah. Here's the thing. Do you guys need to have all that memorized? No. Just memorize the isolated functions. If you understand like what the muscle does concentrically, you will Sherlock Holmes logic square, you can figure out what it does eccentrically because just the exact opposite. What's the opposite of elbow flexion? Elbow extension. So if my bicep does elbow flexion, the antagonist is whatever does elbow extension, right? Which would be my triceps. So that's our guide there. Eddie, you're feeling good. Thomas, does that make sense? Thomas, you with me on that one?
I think I fell asleep.
I hope not.
Oh no.
Maybe. Or it could just be an iPhone thing. All right. So those are the two main things. That's the language we're going to be using for the next next little while. So so we're looking at the whole lower leg today. All right, we're going to start off with the anterior tibialis. Okay, so this is your front shin muscle here. Let's see here, anterior tibialis. I want to see if I can find like a bodybuilder that has like just like a really jacked anterior tib. Yeah, you can kind of see it a little bit, right? But it's right along the shin. You can kind of see the little groove that it creates when it contracts. But that's what it is, right? It's right along here. It's anterior. It's on the front of the leg. And it's a tibialis muscle. There's also your posterior tibialis. We're going to talk about that one next. And it lives in the same area, just behind it. So one's in the front, which would make it anterior. One's in the back. So its isolated function is to concentrically accelerate dorsiflexion and ankle inversion, which are the two things that we talked about earlier that most people are really bad at. Therefore, we often see this as an underactive muscle for most of our clients. Yesterday, when we were pulling our toes back, we were activating our anterior tibialis. And then when we were scooping the foot inward, we were activating our anterior tibialis, right? We were doing that inversion, right? So its isolated function is to concentrically accelerate those two things. So what it does is I'm gonna try and it pulls the toe up like this, and it also pulls the toe like this, inversion. Okay, so those are the two things that it does, which means its integrated function is the exact opposite. It's going to, instead of concentric, it's going to eccentric. Instead of concentric, it's going to eccentric. Instead of accelerating, it's going to decelerate. And instead of doing dorsiflexion, which is pulling your toes towards you, Well, the opposite of dorsiflexion is plantar flexion. The opposite of inversion is going to be eversion. And then because it's attached to the ankle, what is it stabilizing? It is going to isometrically stabilize the foot and ankle, right? So every muscle we use, we're just going to get used in this language, right? And again, like I said, the only thing you really need to have memorized, guys, like if you want to, go ahead and lose the integrative functions and get into those like way later, just memorize, start with the isolated functions. That's where all this starts. And then once you kind of get familiar with that, you can get into the more complicated stuff. But again, we know the whole body is paired up in opposites. There's no muscle in the body that doesn't have an antagonist. Every muscle has an opposite. Otherwise, you'd be like, you'd raise your arm one day, be like, well, I'm stuck like this for the rest of my life. I got nothing that can pull me the other way, right? Like, yeah, that would be crazy. The only exception is that transverse abdominis muscle I talked about. The inner ab shelf, which it doesn't shorten to move you around. It shortens to just create stabilization. That's the only difference, which is why you have the outer ab muscles that do move you around. So that's the anterior tibialis. Posterior tibialis, we're going to show this from the back here because it's the posterior side, but it lives behind the anterior tib. And it does somewhat of the same thing, but it's got some slight differences here. So this concentrically accelerates plantar flexion instead of dorsiflexion. So this one actually works with the calf muscles to point the toe away. But then it also works with the anterior tibialis to do ankle inversion. So they're actually working together there, but they are actually the anterior and the posterior tib. They are antagonists in one way, like one does dorsiflexion and one does plantar flexion. So in that way, they're antagonists to one another. But they both work together to do inversion. Okay. Which is why most of our clients have really weak anterior and really weak posterior tibialis muscles. If I look up pronation distortion syndrome, which is what we were practicing yesterday in the gym, right? We see those clients with, what are we observing here? In this foot, we are observing excessive eversion. So which muscles do I need to strengthen? Both my anterior and posterior tib, because they both do inversion. So both of these muscles are the muscles I want to work on, right? That's the posterior and the anterior tib. And that's going to fix this problem and draw the foot back to neutral. And if we look at like the list, you can see, even if you don't trust me, I'm sure you do, but if we look at the list, there it is. Pronation distortion, lengthened muscles, anterior and posterior tib. Those are the muscles that are underactive. They're over lengthened, right? So what's the opposite of all that? Well, we're going to see all these guys over here. So that's the anterior and the posterior tib. Let's go ahead and flip to the other side of the ankle here. And this is going to be your calf muscles. You've got your soleus, which is actually the deeper of the two calf muscles until it's not. But you can see the soleus here. Let's see here, soleus and gastrocnemius. Your gastrocnemius lives over top. Your soleus lives underneath. There's two terms that are not in your book that we'll sometimes use. We'll sometimes say a muscle is deep, or we'll sometimes say a muscle is superficial. If it's on the outside, it's on the surface, we call it superficial. If it's towards the, deeper down underneath a layer or two, that's what we call a deep muscle. So the soleus lives underneath. You can actually kind of see that from the side here, right? So there's my gastrocnemius laying over top, and then the soleus is kind of tucked behind it, right? But then they all both become the same fascia, and they kind of share an insertion down here at the Achilles tendon. So they definitely come together in the end. But so there is sort of a difference there, right? Is this somebody who can actually contract their soleus? Wow, those are some freaking Adonis calf muscles right there. But yeah, you can see there's the gastrocnemius fibers, lateral and medial, right? And then underneath it, as it all starts to come down, that's your soleus. And this is where you'll feel that. If you go to stretch your, go to stretch your leg, if you straighten your leg out and you just pull your toe straight back with a straight leg, you'll feel a big stretch in the upper portion of your calf. But if you bend your knee as you are pulling your toe back, you'll feel the stretch move from up high down below. And it'll move behind the back of the heel, and that's the soleus. So mostly you'll feel that in this sort of distal section here.
Yeah, I felt it when I was just doing it.
Yeah, right. That's the difference. Gastrocnemius stretch versus soleus stretch. Oops. And there we go. It'll look like this when you're doing it. Actually, there we go. That's from our textbook. See there, right? So there's the straight leg. That's going to be the upper calf. The bent knee. That's the lower calf.
Oh.
So the soleus' isolated function is to concentrically accelerate plantar flexion. Pretty simple, right? Its integrated function is to eccentrically instead of concentrically, decelerate instead of accelerate, dorsiflexion instead of plantar flexion. So when dorsiflexion is happening, it is slowing everything down. It's eccentrically decelerating, right? So as you are going into dorsiflexion, right, if I were to go, which is the anterior tibialis is contracting, right? If I'm going from here and I'm pulling my toe up, my soleus is contracting, but it's contracting for less force. So that causes it to lengthen out, right? It's decelerating. If I were catching myself, if I jumped, right, and then I hit the ground and I'm landing into dorsiflexion, my soleus is what's decelerating me because it's contracting to slow me down, right? It's that lengthening action that it has. And guess what? The gastrocnemius, look at my slides here. See how the picture of the muscle changed, but look at my text. Identical.
Wow.
They do the same thing. And they are listed as the same, which is why we often just kind of group your calves together. But I will say this, NASM is being a little reductive here. They're kind of reducing it down and they're giving you like the broad strokes. They're being a little oversimplified in my not always so humble opinion. But we saw that guy a minute ago, right? We saw he had like a left side and a right side. He had like a lateral and a medial portion of the calf. If I were to make this definition a little bit longer, and if it were me, I would, the lateral gastrocnemius does external rotation and the medial gastrocnemius does internal rotation. So that's also why yesterday, when we were looking at pronation distortion syndrome, I said, we want to kind of focus on stretching the outer part. You want to just stretch your whole calf muscle, I'm good with it. But if I've got somebody whose feet are turning out, I'm going to put a little, if I'm massaging, I'm probably going to put a little special emphasis on the outside portion, just because that's going to be a little bit more responsible here when we look at this in a much more advanced, deeper, meaningful way. But you guys don't necessarily need to have that. You can just keep it really simple. It accelerates plantar flexion, which again, toes point away. And then again, both muscles are going to stabilize the foot and ankle complex. Now, lastly, we are going to have our, in your textbook, it's going to say your peroneus longus. And this is what's funny. NASM was being really oversimple in the last one. And now, in my opinion, they're not being simple enough. We can just call it your peroneals group, because that's what they're going to call it in your actual book. There's actually a lot of peroneal group muscles. If I pull up a picture here. There we go. You can actually see there's actually a lot of these. They're a group of muscles, right? Brevis, longus, and tertius. But they're just being really simple about it. And they're giving us this version. They're just going to call it the peroneus longus, which is the main one. Like, don't get me wrong, this is the one that's mostly tight. But it's right along the side there. So it's along the side, kind of near your anterior tibialis, which would be here, right? But this one is sort of working similar to the posterior tibialis in that it's doing more plantar flexion. But the other thing that it does, and this is what we don't want it to do, is the eversion, right? Take a look at how it's attached. I'm gonna zoom in here. Do you see how like it runs and then it runs across the bridge of the foot? It grabs the top of your foot. That grabbing of the top is what happens, which is why when it pulls, it shows the bottom of the foot, towards the outside there. It's that eversion we were talking about. So in this way, it's working as this is the antagonist to your anterior tib and your posterior tib, because both of those muscles invert and this muscle everts. So, again, this muscle is doing this thing. That's why when we were stretching it, what did we do? We inverted and then we just kind of dropped it behind us to make that inversion a little easier. We did that kind of foot drag thing. You'll also see another really simple peroneal stretch is to just go like this and just grab your foot and pull. That's actually not a bad stretch either. I'm just doing excessive inversion there. There's no perfect stretch. It just depends on what your client's most comfortable with. I like the standing version because it kind of flows. But nothing wrong with that seated version either. So that's your peroneals, which is what they're going to call it in your book. It drives me crazy that they have it listed in your book as this, like in the pages. And then later you'll see that chart. Like I said, this is also from your book, by the way. This is just an old edition. This is an old edition of the corrected book. But this is Nassim's slide here. But you'll see it'll say shortened muscles, gastrocnemius. And again, it should say lateral gastrocnemius, soleus, and then it just says peroneal. That's like, I love Nassim. They're the greatest kinesiologists and exercise physiologists out there, but their editor. They are not English majors.
Yeah.
And I will go on record and say that. All right, so those are the muscles. Now that we understand the muscles a little bit, I've been using these terms, these movements all freaking day. Let's flip around. Maybe that's how you like to memorize it. Maybe you, Eddie, you're like, you know what? I love memorizing by getting the muscles first, and then I learn the movement second. So that's how we have it arranged. But Thomas, maybe you're like, I don't know, I kind of like to learn the movements first and the muscles second. Well, we're going to do that, and we're going to retool everything for the second half of this PowerPoint. So right here, you can see we've got of the ankle, the movements that you're going to make are dorsiflexion, which is pulling your toe towards your face, or plantar flexion, planting your foot away from you. So those are the two big ones there, dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. So dorsiflexion, movement of the top of the ankle and foot towards the anterior tibia, which is the bone here, right? Pulling your toes towards your face, what I like to say. If it's in quotes, by the way,
that's you.
That's me. It's like, oh, that doesn't sound as elegant as the rest of, yeah, that's this guy. Yeah, and then plantar flexion, moving the foot away, pointing your toes away from your face. Every dancer, you're like, I can't do this. That is so much plantar flexion. Every freaking dancer you ever see, right?
Yeah.
That's my favorite thing to do, by the way. Whenever I have like a female client who is very clearly like a dancer, I love to they won't even mention it during their assessment. And then we'll just be standing around and they haven't said anything. And I'll go, so how many years have you danced? And they're like, and it's like, I can tell because number one, they stand like this. And number two, their toes can point like crazy.
Jeez.
It's always kind of fun. It's a really fun mind game. And they go, this guy knows posture. And I'm like, yeah, I do. So that's the first two movements. Those are your sagittal plane movements, by the way. And then we've got our frontal plane movements here. You've got eversion versus inversion. Eversion is turning the ankle of the foot outward or away from the midline. So that's everting here. And then inversion is turning it towards the midline, like turning the bottom of your foot inward.
Inward.
Yep. Then, and actually I didn't even mention, these actually aren't even in your notes because we aren't covering the muscles of the foot. But you get toe flexion, which is like crunching your toes, and toe extension. It's in the PowerPoint, but it's not in your textbook, so I didn't put it in your notes because we got enough stuff to memorize. But if you ever wanted to know which of it is flexion and which of it's extension, there it is.
It makes sense.
Now, here's pronation versus supination. This is where it gets a little complicated. So this is the transverse movement. Remember, transverse is twisting. So pronation and supination is a combination of things. It's a little bit of dorsiflexion, a little bit of eversion, and a little bit of external rotation. So it is the foot flattening sensation, where you can see here, she's kind of collapsing inward, right? So ankle pro.
So they're standing like this.
Hold on a second. What is it?
They're standing like this.
Other way. So this way, and then
this way.
flattening out. Yep.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So here, this is kind of, you can kind of see when it's both. It's a little easier to see, right?
Oof.
Or if we see it from the front, right? So it's externally rotated. It's not like crazy, right? It's not like it's going way out here, but that is external. And you can see that makes this have to go internal. Again, a scoliosis, right? A lot of times we think of this as somebody who's born this way, but if you look at and this one definitely was somebody who was born that way. But you can develop this just by having a job that makes you asymmetric. You know, every firefighter I've ever trained has a scoliosis. I've only worked with a couple firefighters because they usually have like their own fitness programs and stuff. But like every firefighter I've ever worked with has a scoliosis because they all take the hose over the same, they get used to using the same shoulder every time. So then it causes this twisting. So take a look here. That's what's this. Well, I'm going to look at we call it a functional scoliosis when it's temporary. If you were born with it, that's a structural scoliosis. It's like, yeah, fixing that's going to require surgery. But a functional scoliosis is something you develop over time through bad habits. So take a look at this picture here. Right? It curves out this way. So if you were playing Jenga, what would you do? You'd put the block on the opposite side, right? So the damn tower doesn't fall over. Well, that's what happens. It curves this way, so then it curves back this way. Same thing here, right? This curves in this way, so then this bone curves out that way, which makes the hip curve back in this way. Zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. And that's why pronation is so bad. That, and also, now think about the connective tissue on the outside here. Remember that lateral ankle sprain we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
See how this is like shortened? It's pinched together. Never has to stretch. And then the one day where they try to stretch it, it's not used to it, tears.
Snap. Yeah.
Yep. So, and you'll see excessive supination too. You'll sometimes see this. This is like somebody who's like pigeon-toed. It's way rarer. You don't see it as often. Where's somebody with both legs? It's so much easier to see when it's both legs. Yeah. So there you go. You can see all the weight is on the outside portion of their foot. So instead, last time we saw this bottom blue line would go this way, and then we saw this to go this way. This time we're seeing the exact opposite. So that's, pigeon-toed, right? Or somebody with a high arch, and they kind of stand kind of like this versus everters who stand kind of like this. And see how my knees bowed out in this version? My knees caved in this version, right? We'll talk about that tomorrow when we get to the knee stuff tomorrow. It's going to piggyback, every one of these conversations is going to kind of stack on one another. So that is foot flattening, or this is excessively high arch. So if that's how you like to memorize these things, you like to go muscles first, movements second, great. But let's go ahead and flip it around, because we can always memorize it the other way around as well. We could always look at movements first and then just whatever muscles are on the list that do that. Everybody memorizes a little bit differently, so we want to give you guys the option here. So take a look, and I know it's kind of a shorter list, but the agonist muscles, you can see the list. We got dorsiflexion. Which muscles do that? It's your anterior tibialis, and your peroneals actually do help a little there. So this is what's kind of confusing, though. This is actually why NASM is being specific. It's not all the peroneals. It's the tertius, the little tiny one here. Then you got plantar flexion. A lot of muscles that do plantar flexion, which is why we start to understand why yeah, I said yesterday, right? I'm always trying to get my clients to do a little bit more like dorsiflexion. Like if I got my clients doing like a bicep curl on one leg, I'm always telling them, I'm like, look, I want you to focus on the bicep. We're working on the biceps right now, but please pull your toe up. You know, just get a little, like we spend all day like this. We don't want that. Just give me a little bit of this while we've got it, right? You're doing shoulder stuff. Great. It's an opportunity to even just pull that up. So that's going to be working, you know, but that's not what we're good at. We're good at the dorsal, we're good at the plantar flexion because big freaking calf muscle, you know, the gastrocnemius and the soleus is also pretty big. And then your posterior tibialis is working on that as well. So like, you know, it's a big list versus, you know, a little tiny list. And then we got our inversion. That's going to be your anterior and your posterior tibialis. That's another one that we're not so good at. And then the eversion is going to be all those peroneal muscles, right? Which we just call the peroneal group. The longus, brevis, tertius, and then even the little tiny muscles in your foot called your extensor digitorum longus. They're just muscles on top of your foot that do the toe extension that we talked about earlier. Like I said, we're not doing, NASM doesn't make you guys do toe stuff because honestly, it's so small that if you have a client who's like, I'm having toe pain, like if it's turf toe, we can give a little bit of advice on that. It's like, okay, you got turf toe, you know, which is like just in the big toe and it's just like a kind of a jammed sensation. It's like, go get some toe spreaders, you know, and let's work on the mobility in your entire ankle because you have, you know, you're not feeling ankle problems, but like it's your ankle that's kind of causing your toe to do, you know, to dig really hard instead of using the bridge of your foot. Sure. Okay. Maybe personal trainers do work on toe stuff, but if it's like any of those other toe, it's like, okay, you got to go, you know, go see a doctor and, you know, have them take a look and make sure that there's no small damage that is outside of my pay grade. That's why we also don't do wrist stuff for the most part. We'll do a little bit of wrist stuff, but not much. Oh, I did have it in here. Oh, well, here's the toe flexion stuff. I thought we were, yeah. So, you know, extensor or flexor hallucisus and then extensor digitorums. Yeah, so those are the muscles that are actually doing that part.
Cool.
And that's all of our muscles for the foot and ankle. Like I said, it's not the biggest list today, but hopefully you have a pretty good understanding of how this works. Now we're going through all the like sort of like this is a kinesiology class, right? So it's a lot of labeling, kind of like an anatomy class is all labeling, and then a physiology class is like a how it all works, you know. And that's why usually those are taught in isolation. So we are kind of teaching the anatomy in isolation here. I like to give a lot of examples where I'm like during a squat or doing this, you know, like I like to example, but like you'll notice there's not a lot of notes on those things. Next mod, we'll have PFT 101. That's the 12-day class, which is our assessments class. And that's where we'll break that down and we'll really be looking at the movements. So how you feeling, Eddie?
Awesome. Pretty good, man. Pretty good. I did have a question about the test from yesterday. So I didn't start it yet because I was so busy. I had like so many like appointments. Like I had a haircut appointment, I had a dentist appointment, I had all kinds of different shit. On top of that, I had to go to the gym, then I had to work because you know usually I work like after 5. So then like so what I do is like I do a little bit of like delivering food here and there since that's like really flexible for me in the meantime.
Love it.
So yeah, so you know, that's like my expenses for supplements, foods and stuff like that on the side.
Right,
Extra stuff, you know. So yeah, so I was thinking, can I still do it today?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
My advice, you know, like today's day 7, right? Tomorrow's gonna be day 8. You're gonna get homework 3 tomorrow.
Okay.
So you know, if you want to catch up, like Thomas here is great about like, you know, usually like catching up on the weekends, right? Not to overshare or anything. But like that's the thing, right? Like everybody has their own kind of pace on things. This is adult school. You can catch up on the weekends if you want, but you will always hear me give the advice like don't get too far behind, you know?
Yeah.
Because then you're gonna wake up one day and be like,
yeah.
what's that, Thomas?
I said, I know.
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, I think like, you know, I think that, you know, if you do a good job of like always communicating with me and like trying to keep pace and stuff. But but yeah, the homework train never stops. It's like every 2 days, you know. It's like
Yeah.
you get behind on your credit card payment, you know, eventually the interest keeps adding up, you know.
Yeah. Nah, it's just one of those days where it's just like super busy. Not that I have those days all the time, but I
Yeah,
definitely have time to study right now and go for it. So
that's the thing, man. Yeah, that's totally on your own pace. There will be, if you ever do get so far behind and I'm about to go post grades that it like gets in my way, then I'll drop the hammer. But that's usually
yeah,
about 6 weeks before that happens. So like,
gotcha.
fine.
All right, cool. At first I'm like, damn, like I think I missed out. I think I'm not gonna get graded for this midterm or something like that. I was like,
We don't do it that way.
because you know some like in school like they'll say, oh, like you only have this day and this day only, and that's it. Like you can't go back. Then I'm like, damn. All right, cool.
That
That's dope.
that is the type of school, in my opinion. This is again my not so humble opinions. That approach to me lessens the entrepreneurial spirit that I want people to have. I want you guys to be self-starters, you know. If I, you know, poke you to make you do a deadline, you're not doing it on your own. You know what I mean? You did it because I told you. I'd much
Yeah.
rather have you do it because you're like, all right, let's see how I can nail this thing out. You know what I mean?
Cool.
Cool.
What's up with Mir? He didn't show up, huh?
Oh, he texted me earlier. He's coming to the
Oh, he
meeting.
did.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure he had like some businesses this morning, probably.
Imagine, yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right.
All
Sounds
right, let
good.
me kill the recording here. Thomas, how you feeling?
Oh, he passed
Feeling
out
good.
again. Oh, they.